Okay, I think we're live. Welcome back, everyone, to the FPL Script. This is Season 3, Episode 6, otherwise our Gameweek 2 preview of sorts for the 24-25 season. I'm your co-host, FPL__Fran on Twitter, with my co-host, Schadenfreude or JD. That's Schadenfreude with a 1. We had some pretty slow starts to the season, but you had a much better start than myself, so do you want to just go quickly through your Gameweek 1 review?
Thank you, Fran. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it was a really bad start for the both of us. Fran is being too kind when he says I've had a much better start. For some reason, I think it's just Dunk over Kwanzaa. That's probably the only difference because I believe Brereton Diaz scored the same as Nkunku and Muniz scored the same as João Pedro. So it's exactly the same team as far as score is concerned, except for one defender. Uh, Abysmal, but also expected once Salah went big. Holland's goal sort of made me think, maybe we can recover this a little bit, but the yellow card, I don't even think that was a yellow card, to be honest. And even the Chelsea fans were kind of confused why that was given as a yellow card to Holland when Rico Lewis scored immediately after that foul. So anyway, the Guardiola mystery bonus point as well. So there's a lot of stuff that happened last week, which was retroactive changing of bonus points and a lot of confusion. But I guess they have now settled into the new BPS system, and there shouldn't be so much chaos going forward. So bad week, but just to pick out a few players. So no Barco, no Mavididi, and no Kwanzaa. I think that's the biggest win. So hoping to roll the transfer unless Pedro Porro is done. So I think we can move on to your team.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I think you spoke quite well in terms of the outcomes of this sort of team structure. I obviously had Kwanzaa, but do have Duncan Konsa on the bench. So this is the Winks variation of the João Pedro / Adam Armstrong Holland only draft template. I would say, just with Kwanzaa in it, as opposed to let's say a Van de Ven or a Robinson, for example. So yeah, it was a pretty poor week in the sense that Kwanzaa almost died immediately as a pick in the first half. But other than that, I think most of the players I'm pretty fine with. I guess we can maybe talk about someone like Nkunku. He's clearly a potential problem child, but I still think the reality is it's just about where we land on his minutes. And I'm not as low as some people are on Nkunku. Yes, of course, he might be a transfer out in game weeks 3 and 4, but I think I'm going to give him at least the next 2 fixtures and then reassess, because I think someone really aptly put it on Twitter and just said something like, the problem isn't people who picked Nkunku, it's Enzo. No, I'm kidding. But
So just a point on Nkunku, because
yeah.
I was really close to your draft essentially, which is exactly what we had when we did the preview for Game Week 1. I definitely am, I would say, more scared, which is weird because Enzo Maresca's words actually make me think that with the limited pool of players that he's actually considering, I don't see this as a regular occurrence. I just think this was a Game Week 1 thing where potentially he was trying to do something radically different to what he would do against lesser teams, because it is Man City. So I think there is more of a scope for doing something which maybe is not part of his regular plan. Again, this is all speculation because I don't have enough information about this manager. I'm sure Leicester City fans do. But then again, this is a completely new setup with 40 odd first team players now, out of which he's apparently ruled out half of them. So with that particular quote, I am actually thinking Nkunku has better minutes now than what I was expecting, because I was thinking everyone is going to be in competition with each other in a fairly competitive way. I'm repeating words here, but I think it's more of a case that Nkunku is pretty much the first choice, either as left wing or as number 10. So I would definitely expect him to get more minutes, and João Pedro as well. I think João Pedro getting the minutes that he has definitely has made me think that he was potentially the best pick. Although Adam Armstrong got like 0.76 xG last game week and didn't manage to score, so maybe Armstrong owners are unlucky as well. So there's a lot of hindsight takes, and that's why we need to probably wait for a couple of game weeks for the dust to settle from this team.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
the next topic is sort of bringing about a post, which was an update actually of a previous post made in 2022 by Trout. But effectively, it's sort of a small discussion on the Kwanzaa situation, right? Yes, of course, he dropped in price, which, you know, there was a lot of discussion of that on Twitter, probably myself part of the problem, but he did drop in price, and I think a lot of managers sat up on Tuesday night, especially those with Kwanzaa on their teams, and probably had to make a decision. The decision was most likely going Robinson, Rico, or Rolling, and I decided to go for Rico. I think a couple other managers in a very similar position, Andra to myself, did a similar move, as in proactively made a transfer as opposed to rolled. But we obviously equally have a ton of managers who have just tanked the roll, which I think is totally fair. But this post is just quickly just touching on, you know, what the value is of, well, or I guess the loss in value is of losing 0.1 in TV over the course of the season, I suppose. And yeah, do you want to speak on that?
I think, yeah, so sorry, just to, because there's some information that is possibly not in this tweet, but was part of the previous post. Now things change from season to season, especially with potentially new rules, and I haven't thought about how they would impact the offset of team value. But just to continue with this graph from last season, it's something around the range of 1.8 to 2 EV for the whole season. If you make a transfer prior to the price dropping, as opposed to the making the move after the price drop. So the situation that gave or prompted this tweet was actually the Bowen transfer. So a lot of people did transferred in Bowen last season when West Ham were yet to play their Conference League match. Europa League, because they won the Conference League, so they were in the Europa League. So in their Europa League match, and consequently Bowen managed to get injured, and then he missed out on the next game. And so Trout was one of those managers who did the move early, and I actually was of the opinion that there was no need to do it. But then I've seen managers like Kiwi and Trout always advocate for trying to make moves early whenever possible, and I do see the sense in that. Again, I don't know how much importance we should place on EV granularity to this level, but I also think it makes sense, because like I was telling FPL Johnson on Twitter, that it's not just 0.1 EV, 0.1, right? For now, it's 0.5. Because if you want to make any moves that are lateral, you can't make them until you get to game week 3. So it's not just 0.1, you're losing 0.5 for a couple of game weeks, which I think is a big deal. And Fran and I were speaking prior to Fran making his move, and I was of the firm opinion that Rico Lewis is the only 4.5 defender that I would go for if I were to move on from Kwanzaa. Because with Robinson, his EV is so bad. Now maybe his EV will improve once Joachim Andersen gets into the team, but I doubt it. I doubt how much his EV will improve. And so Rico Lewis was the only one, because unless something apocalyptic happens, I'm pretty sure he's going to play 90 minutes in game week 2. I am pretty sure about that. There is no doubt in my mind. It's just game week 3, game week 4 onwards that you start seeing more and more doubt, which is fair. And I think everyone who is buying Rico Lewis already knows this. It's not as if they are buying Rico Lewis thinking he's going to keep playing forever. But there is some part of, or some percentage of probability that you can assign to the fact that it could actually turn out to be a transfer for 5 to 6 game weeks, which is the ceiling, right? You're looking at the ceiling as he plays for 5 to 6 weeks, which is excellent. Because imagine if City City managed to field Rico Lewis for 5-6 Premier League games, and in the Champions League game they managed to rest him, and they play some other system where Kyle Walker plays. So I definitely would have done it if I were in Fran's shoes, and I was very close to being in his shoes. So I don't see any problem with that. And I'm sure Fran has his own thoughts on this, but I just wanted to give perspective as someone who does not own Kwanzaa.
No, I think that is good perspective, because I do think there is the emotional element of iterating on a move that you're probably not that invested in. As in, are you really running solves on like people facing the Kwanzaa situation, people with very specific drafts, and I think there's also like a separation between the types of owners who own Kwanzaa but also own Barco, who is now a huge problem. and was a problem even as of last night when the rumor initially came out that he was going to join Sevilla on loan, versus, let's say, owners who have Duncan Konsa in place, and can totally, I suppose, take on the appeal of Rico Lewis as long as he plays Gameweek 2, and probably stand to benefit much more than if they were to just simply go Robinson. Because I actually think that I will stand also for the Robinson transfer in that if you sort of take into account, I suppose, some of the EV losses that you'll take as a Quants owner, and then think about how good Robinson would be for your team going forwards, and obviously with the potential surplus in EV with some of the transfers being made, then yeah, Robinson also makes a lot of sense for people who had slightly thinner teams, I would say, at the back compared to myself. But yeah, I felt like it was a slightly positive move to go Rico Lewis, and that's even taking into account, yeah, that he might simply just be banished from the squad after game week 2. Now, of course, there's a non-zero chance that Rico Lewis might not even start game week 2, and that he might be benched at 45 minutes for Walker. But you know, I'm generally very aggressive as a manager, I would say, anyways. I don't know whether the minus 16 last season would give it away, but yeah, I generally speaking will probably gamble a little bit more than most managers, and I'm happy to do so because I know that I'm going to wild card in game week 6, and if it doesn't work out, that's totally fine with me. But that's sort of my position on it.
Also, one more thing to point out maybe is that for the past 1.5 seasons, Fran and I have done this pod, so we've talked more frequently, and what I've realized is there's some situations where you do get the appeal of rolling transfers whenever you can, right? Because there's better moves to make in conjunction with the moves that you have planned. But what I've always observed is, and this is again maybe anecdotal evidence, so that's why I don't tend to place much weightage to on these scenarios. But I've seen that you do sacrifice immediate gains sometimes, and that does come back to bite you because the long-term gains don't materialize because that EV has more uncertainty baked into it, which makes sense. So if you are one of those managers who wants to play aggressively, like Fran just said, it makes total sense. And Rico Lewis is just the perfect player for this sort of a play. I just can't see anyone else who would be more suited to a short-term transfer and then possibly being on the bench for as long as you need him.
Yeah, it's a good point as well, because I think on a wildcard 6 draft, you know, the only realistic game week 3 2 free transfers that you would ever be making is something of the like of, you know, Nkunku to Palmer, and then Haaland to Watkins. But that's also a Watkins that has an incredible amount of EV associated with penalties. And penalty share. Possibly, of course, reviews already take into account is poor finishing of penalties in that equation. So maybe, look, the reality is Watkins' games are good. But, you know, it's not like that was an extremely appealing line for me. And that was when I really nuked down Nkunku's minutes. Now, I'm not the type of manager, I suppose, to just suddenly drop Nkunku to 0 minutes, because I think there's not too much value in doing that, when I think, you know, worst case scenario, you're dealing with a mix of, you know, him starting or him coming off the bench, and he's still going to play at a bare minimum, I would say, 35 minutes, right? Because if he can get subbed off at 58 minutes, it's very likely that as a bench option, he can also come on and play something like 35 minutes, right? Even 25 minutes if we're just being a little bit low on him. So yeah, I think Nkunku's minutes still, for the most part, look okay to me. And so when I was running solves where I had situations like Nkunku's minutes just very quickly drying up, but him still being, you know, loosely a bench option, I still found the Rico Lewis transfer to be quite optimal for me. But yeah, I think I can totally understand managers seeing this as a situation where this can be an exact replica of the Quanta situation, where you think next week Rico Lewis is set for a price drop, and that's totally fine. But then I guess I think Rico Lewis is maybe a little bit more insulated, as in I don't foresee any Quanta to Rico Lewis mover suddenly also moving off of Rico Lewis in game week 2. So he's probably not going to take that price drop, unfortunately, like Quanta owners have. Very much in the same lens that Mavididi is not going to get a price drop, because he's owned by the 1% who are not going to move him this week, because he was never planned to play for this week for those managers in game week 2. So that's sort of my thoughts on something like Rico Lewis.
Yes, spot on. And also, you mentioned Game Week 3 for Watkins, right? And
Yeah.
he has Leicester in Game Week 3 and Everton in Game Week 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I was checking, obviously, the Champions League around that time as well.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
So not only are penalties boosting his EV, I just feel like minutes could also be a factor. And it's quite a reasonable thing to assume that he will play 70-ish minutes in one of those games because it's a novel thing for them. And one, I don't know if it's even going to be accurate, but there's two things possibly people can look at. And again, this might be over analyzing things. One is obviously because Emery has played a lot in Europa League, so you have a lot of history of how he manages midweek games and his first team. And the second is what happens when a team comes into the Champions League after a long stretch of time or for the first time in their club history. So Newcastle United came back after a long time. You can check what Eddie Howe did, but then that would not be technically applicable. It's maybe just a good yardstick for you to use. And all of that might just point you to the fact that players will get some rest, but it will not be as predictable as you might think.
That's very fair. All right. Shall we switch gears very quickly to something that you've prepared for us? Maybe you can just quickly walk us through, and also for the audio listeners, on what's going on.
Absolutely. So I was discussing Wildcard 2 with Frank just because there are people who have bench boosted in Game Week 1, and that was always something that was on the cards for people who are banking on there only being two double game weeks. And so, with the mystery chip also in play, there might not be enough double game weeks for you to use triple captain, mystery chip, and bench boost. For those players and also for people who feel like they, for example, I don't know if there are any unfortunate managers who own Barco, Mavididi, and Kwanzaa. Maybe that seems like a very niche combination, and I hope no one owns all three of them. But if they do, and I suppose they want to change up the team for some reason, I just thought I can run simulations in review based on default minutes and some custom settings. So that way the data remains proprietary. And what we've shared with you here on screen are the percentages of players that have been picked across the simulations. So for 20 simulations, these are the results, or these are the players that show up. Now, Fran rightly pointed out to me that Wildcard 2 makes very little sense for most people, but my point was we can just use this as a sense check.
Yeah.
And the sense check is that if you feel like you ignored some player and he's showing up here, let's say at more than 20% of the teams, then maybe there is some case to be made for you to take him into consideration moving forward. It's not even that you have to make a transfer in Game Week 2. So I'm just going to read out some of the top picks for people who are listening on podcast, and then we can maybe take it from there. So from goalkeepers, we have Henderson, Sanchez, Flecken, and McCarthy as the top four. Now Sanchez, I am really skeptical about, as everyone knows, his position is already pretty much in doubt, and now with his performance against Man City, which was not inspiring at all, I don't know how long he's going to last, because I've seen some fans already talking about Jorgensen. So if we want to discount Sanchez, let's go with Areola, who's fifth on that list. With defenders, you have Konza from Aston Villa, Dunk, Guardiola, Pedro Porro, Robertson, Ruben Dias, Harwood Bellis, and Trent. And Gabriel, if you want to go as far as down as ninth. For midfielders, you have Saka, Palmer, Salah, Nkunku, Bruno Fernandes, Eze, Rogers, Odegaard, and Diogo Jota. And for forwards, you have Armstrong, João Pedro, Isaac, Holland, Vardy, Havertz, and Solanke. So interestingly, the reason I did this was Salah is 65% and Holland is 40%, which makes sense given that there has been a seismic change in the EV gap. So, Fran, I don't know if you want to talk more about this, because I know you've been tracking their EV gap closely, so you might be better placed to discuss this.
Yeah, I believe the EV has already swung more than +1 just for Game Week 2 in both ways. So if you're a Holland only drafter, I guess you'll, I mean, look, this, I think rightly, when speaking to Mark on this, I mean, he just made the very simple point that you can't do anything about this, EV moving.
Yes.
And also this is just point in time stuff. So think we've seen multiple seasons where Haaland in a lot of game weeks had his EV sort of boosted close to the end. Very likely that we'll see that again. But yeah, it seems like the Salah EV has taken a bit of a boost. I feel like it's a bit of a Liverpool attack EV boost as well, because I've also noticed that Jota's minutes, or not his minutes rather, but his EV has also gone up, per game week. And so that's interesting, right? Another point to mention too, I suppose, is on Haaland. I wonder if there's a bit of baking in on, I guess, team strength for now, given that they have some players still yet to come back into the team, that sort of thing. A lot of people sort of like to call it, playing with or without Rodri, that kind of thing too. I'm sure there's some small elements of that in play. But of course, I think when you're looking at wildcard 2, seeing that Haaland is probably the dominant option, and he's the thumbnail of this video, it's interesting, right? That he's not featuring on as much as, let's say, Salah.
Yes. I think interesting player I saw was Vardy, because now that we know he started in game week 1, I wonder how many teams would have, or how many managers would have had Vardy as their third striker. I still don't think I would have, just because of his age, and I feel like he could be the first choice for the entire season, but I still think his minutes will be capped at around, let's say, 70 to 75. Maybe 80 if there's no games around the weekend game. So with all of that in mind, I feel like Armstrong and Joao Pedro being 1 and 2 makes sense. That was actually a 50-50 call for me. Not for me, apparently, because I went for neither, but for most people, it was a 50-50 call.
Yeah.
And not seeing Munoz here makes sense, because Nkunku is high up, right? So if you were to go for Nkunku, you just don't have that money. And that was the decision that I had to make, which was going Ben Brereton Diaz, or basically a 5.5 million midfielder over someone like Nkunku, which is why I'm extremely skeptical about my about how the Game Week 2 is going to go in general, because I just feel like the 6.5s have had an underperformance across the board, and so it just feels like something, or some of these players might just revert to their mean, which for someone like Nkunku is quite a huge jump anyway, just if he manages to revert to his mean. I don't know if that makes you more optimistic about Nkunku, but for me, it certainly makes me feel like he's still very much, he was the 6.5 million midfielder of choice.
Yeah, I guess I just have to default to what I said earlier, where we can't really judge until we just know the minutes outcomes over the next few game weeks. And when I'm looking at him in my team, I think this could be amazing. This could also be absolutely awful. Sort of watching how things unfold. I guess just to point out things that I actually find very interesting. So I've seen Wesley Fofana very, very low, but then I do think that the implication is that if you can get access to a Chelsea defender, because of course Sanchez is very high, and if you imagine that player could be, let's say, Colwill, that he'd actually feature quite highly on a wildcard too. Robertson is extremely high. I think he's definitely a pick that a lot of people have already probably planned to have an open mind around, because that transfer for Game Week 4 for a lot of Gabriel owners, that's there. So that still seems like a line that's like very much alive. Other than that, I think the interesting thing is always going to be about, once you move away from defaults, like how do you assess certain players like Solanke, who played a lot of minutes but has some pen share and review. What do we think about some other picks like Jota or Rogers as well, who played really good minutes in Game Week 1, but once again you have to sort of contextualize that Watkins was an early sub in the Game Week 1 game for Aston Villa, and Darwin I think had 0 minutes, right?
Yes.
And that can very well change and very well should change in the short term. So I guess maybe we could also touch on, what do you think about Heung-min Son? Because I feel like a lot of people are now very, very low on him. And that's just, I think, the eye test, right? Just reacting to his performance in Game Week 1. But then generally speaking, he has been priced as if he's like a competitor to the Fodens of the world, who I can also see is very low here. but I think the default minutes for Foden are very low.
That is because of default minutes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and so I'm just thinking now, is it firmly the case that we're very unlikely to touch someone like Son at all in the season, or I don't know if you have any thoughts on him.
He is one player where I think there was never a doubt that he would be in my team, or rather, I was never going to pick him.
Yeah.
Simply because of the price bracket, like you said.
Yeah.
It's not a personal thing, obviously. If I can get EV out of him, I will choose him. Review seems to have actually, I don't know, it's worked in a funny way, right? Review has assigned a penalty share to Solanke, which might never materialize. But by doing so, it's actually reduced the EV from Son, which has helped us in a way. And it's maybe compensated for the fact that Son also has some minutes baked into his role as center forward, which is not going to happen now. Or maybe that has already dwindled on review because review is pretty much instantaneous with these updates. But I was just thinking that last season was a clear case of him having some share with center forward and some share with left wing. And if we were to go back to left wing, you've already pointed this out in one of our previous podcasts that he definitely has less npxG and more XA. And so I just feel like that makes Saka or even Palmer, for that matter, better choices. And Foden, of course. But Foden, unfortunately, I left him at default minutes because the more I adjust minutes, the more we're just sharing reviews data. So I just wanted to run it on default minutes and see what pops. And Foden is the obvious exception. Gabriel was also a little surprising. In general,
Arsenal I think is quite low, right? Because
exactly.
You just skip their best game for a while.
Exactly.
And I think the whole point of a lot of people looking at Wildcard 6 is, we're all thinking, and I think I responded to Andy Martin on Twitter on this, but if you're on that Wildcard 6 Haaland draft and you don't have many Arsenal players outside of Saka, the reality is you know that you're probably going to take the L in Gameweek 1 anyways. And so when you're looking at Gameweeks 2 to 5 for a team like Arsenal, despite their actual standards, that's a horrendous run of games. And so you're absolutely hoping that Arsenal, just perform poorly as they should. But whether that actually happens or not is probably going to determine a lot of the outcomes between, I think, the Salah only type of draft, where it has that sort of room baked in for Arsenal defense.
No, that's actually a great point, because I was also thinking, not for you now, but for my team, I had only one player each from City, Arsenal, and Liverpool, which on the face of it, if you were not told the fixtures, you would think that is a ridiculous idea.
Yeah.
But because of the way the fixtures have fallen, it makes sense. Now that you have two City players instead of two Liverpool players, at least there's something to point out that you've at least invested in maybe the right teams, I would say, because the EV also comes from team strength, and there's an obvious chasm between these three teams. Even between these three teams, I would say Arsenal, City are pretty much in their own league now compared to Liverpool, even though Liverpool seems to be inching towards them based on Elevenify's latest team strength update. So if we were wildcarding 6 right now, which is the plan, I think we will definitely see more players from Arsenal and more players from Liverpool possibly at that time.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, once again, we did point out that Robertson's ridiculously priced. Yeah, even when Liverpool have a bad run of games, if we think he's nailed, he's just going to be someone who could very well stay on our teams for a while. It's nice to see Palmer really high up here, because I actually thought this actually looks like a close approximation of Wildcard 6, in the sense that I think the template right now vaguely is Saka, Palmer, Nomium, but then it has a lot more Arsenal. So I just thought that was quite curious. But another thing too is just, look, the pricing has been amazing, because we probably see most of the players here. And once again, if we adjusted Foden's minutes, you could very well see a lot of Foden as well. And so it just shows that a lot of the teams are packed full of EV, and that's the name of the game, I suppose.
Yeah. Do we have an xMins graphic, or should we just discuss if we have any particular xMins players that we wanted to discuss?
No xMins graphic that has your face on it, but
okay, no problem. We can probably discuss this on this.
I mean, I guess on xMins, what would be quite interesting. I mean, it's still worth iterating on a lot of players here, right? Because they'd still be relevant. what were the main changes, I guess, or takeaways that you had for Game Week 1 on xMins?
So for me, the biggest change was Robertson starting Game Week 1, because even with very few preseason minutes, the confidence in him being the clear number one choice was something that I was not betting on. Or maybe, like I said, there have to be some changes that you have to make to your priors, and this is one of those updates.
Yeah.
And so now moving ahead, when I am adjusting Robertson's minutes, I will make sure that my thought process is he is the number one pick, and if there are more than one games in a week, those are the only weeks where I will nerf his expected minutes.
That's fair. I was actually a bit shocked to see Wood being an early sub.
That's actually a great topic, by the way, because NKTI is also apparently close to signing, even though I think they rejected the last bit, but it's still close to happening as per David Ornstein. So if that's the case, then that firmly means Chris Wood will not be an option, because I don't see how NKTI does not play the majority of the minutes.
Yeah, I also think Arsenal are absolutely laughing if they are able to sell NKTI for that sort of price point, because if you see Arteta's, I guess, own sort of usage of him in the last, I don't know, year and a half, just
it was to spite us Havertz owners in Game Week 1 last season. That was his only use. Yeah,
because he's working really hard for the gaffer. No, but on a serious note, I think that's definitely quite interesting. And I think I wonder as well if that kind of spells some of the issues with some of the picks, like Munoz and João Pedro. João Pedro, the situation I suppose is, how important is Welbeck early doors, I guess. Because he will have to fight for his minutes with Jorginho in the team. And that's definitely interesting. Armstrong, I think, is a bit of a wait and see, because I do think that some people have that sort of general argument of, when you look at a team like Southampton and you project them to do as poorly as they do, do you have any sort of confidence in players like Armstrong? Because I feel like with Morris, arguably, the fact that he was a penalty taker actually got him a lot of points, but then how often do you really expect penalties as well for a weaker team is definitely probably something you can ask. So I wonder as well, for the people who actually have a draft that doesn't, let's say, contain some of these budget forwards, whether people are more happy with that sort of draft structure. And that's very much the Salah-only draft, right? You don't really have to very much deal with them, or at least you have depth where you have, let's say, Armstrong and João Pedro, and you can kind of fine-tune the fixtures quite a bit. But yeah, I don't know if there were any other points. Mosquera is definitely a good 4.0 option. That's definitely, I think, I wouldn't say it's new news, but then I guess it was realized, in Game Week 1 with him playing there. And
he's playing centre back.
And some very interesting sort of approach to football from him. But yeah, I guess
I would say Munoz, I would say, as an owner, I was not too happy with the minutes he got in Game Week 1, given that he had no international tournaments to go to, and he pretty much was or is supposed to be their first choice centre forward. It clearly seems that Marco Silva wants to also make sure that Raul Jimenez is not entirely unhappy with the situation, and that just means that I'm not saying he's going to get subbed in around 78 minutes every week, but it does seem to be a possibility every time they want to maybe close up shop. Because United away is definitely a game where it's scoring a goal, okay, if you can nick one, it's fine. And I agree that Fulham have been playing well from last season. But I just don't think that was their first priority. I suppose the first priority was, okay, let's try to keep this at 0-0. So from that perspective, game state does come into the picture, but also made me think, with him as well as Ben Brereton Diaz for Southampton, if their minutes are going to be low 80s, high 70s, it's not the players that I gambled on. So because I clearly gambled on them thinking they had 85 plus minutes, or not 85 plus, but the decay would be slower and they would start off with, let's say, 85 to 88 minutes. So one for me to keep an eye on, I suppose.
That's fair. Do you want to touch on one pick still, which I think might irk some analytics owners? I guess it's Munoz still from Crystal Palace. I'm not really sure how to touch on it, but I think his EV actually looks incredibly close to Mark Guehi's. which is not very impressive.
Yes.
So what do you think the situation is on that? Is it the case that we don't have enough data on him as an attacker? Because I feel like we have a couple seasons of him in the Belgian league with good numbers. What's the sort of situation with his EV that you're seeing that maybe I'm not?
Formadillo asked me a question about this, or we discussed this rather, and I am of the firm opinion that his EV is really understated. I just don't understand how he does not have more expected value. Again, this is completely based off players that I've seen with the data that Munoz has, and with the defensive team strength that Crystal Palace have. That I'm trying to extrapolate from some other players for whom I have modeled expected value. So this is not really a one-for-one comparison. It's more of a player of his attacking quality and the fact that he is now firmly playing right wing back.
Yeah.
I just don't see why his EV should not be significantly higher than any other Crystal Palace player. Because he was firmly in my thoughts. Now, the problem with him is I could never find the extra 0.5 million to go from the 4.5 million defender to him, which is a separate issue. Or rather, the compromise would have been Dunk Konza to Munoz and then Barco, most probably. So I suppose I dodged the bullet there. But also, I'm thinking it's the people that went for him are extremely unfortunate that they will not get the massive data rank that he deserves, in a sense.
I think so.
So, I'm really surprised because, as you can see, Henderson is clearly one of the top picks on Wildcard 2.
That's why I mentioned that.
Exactly. So it looks like Crystal Palace do have some of the best fixtures in terms of defensive strength. And it really perplexes me. I suppose the point you raised has to be the only valid point, which is the numbers are from a league which is far inferior to the Premier League. So maybe there is a big factor which nerfs his expected or his base level expected stats. So if he has another season similar to what he had last season in the Premier League, I definitely think his EV will get a massive boost, or even throughout the season, I suppose, because even a half season's worth of data is going to definitely prop him up in terms of expected value.
Yeah, I feel like we had a bit of that last season too with some of the Spurs defenders. Like maybe Udogie is a good example of that because I'm now sort of using Udogie as that sort of comparison piece, really, because he's definitely less attacking than Porro. Probably has worse underlying numbers than Munoz in Munoz's limited time in the Premier League, and then I'm also using Van de Ven as a comparison to, let's say, Guehi, for example. And I just find it so curious that there's a gigantic gulf between Udogie and Van de Ven, but then a very minimal gap between Munoz and Guehi. But definitely still a pick that I think would be interesting. And for Porro owners, I feel like he's not going to be a suggested transfer on review, but I definitely would go there if somehow Porro turns out to be out for a while, which I think at this moment in time, I don't think a lot of us have that sort of doubt, but it could very well happen. And he's definitely a pick that I'd be interested in. But yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to point out.
Yeah, just to touch on that topic, I know we've gone on many different threads with this, but if Porro were ruled out, I don't think I'll still make a move.
Fair.
So I'm probably still rolling, and I don't think Fran's going to take a -4 as well. So
just you wait.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I saw some people in the chat pointing out triple captaincy talk because that's all everyone seems to be talking about for the past couple of days. So why
not? Let's just move on quickly.
Absolutely, in the captaincy segment. So our usual captaincy segment has Haaland, Salah, Son, and Palmer as the top 4 choices on default minutes as per review. Sorry, Fran. Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, no. I think just quick jump in. A lot of people are going to be like, "What about Foden? What about KDB?" That's once again, if you guys think that they will play good, consistent minutes this game week, they are definitely going to be better captaincy options than anyone that isn't Salah. I think Salah might just be clear, to be honest, of anyone that isn't Haaland. But yeah,
absolutely. So just to touch on the triple captaincy talk that's been taking place. So firstly, my opinion, or rather my decision, is not to triple captain him. That's not a difficult choice for me. But secondly, just to rationalize or play devil's advocate in this case, the reasoning seems to be, as I've pointed out earlier, that with only 2 double game weeks, there is a realistic scenario where you have more chips than double game weeks this season. And so people are clamoring for an early chip play, because for once the future expected double game weeks do justify a triple captain in a single game week. I still think that there will potentially be a player who will be close in EV terms, even if it's not Holland, because with Holland we definitely have a situation where the longer the season goes on, the more chance of him being injured at any point during the season. So Salah is there, Son is there, Palmer is there, Saka is there. I think there are so many players that you can still triple captain and be happy with. So I am not going to triple captain in this week, but also I don't think it is a bad decision in a sense, because you're
Yeah.
trying to gamble on an outcome. It's just that the gamble is a pretty radical one, wherein if it goes wrong, it's going to go substantially wrong for you. But if it goes right, then fair enough. I'm not going to judge that in hindsight, which is why I'm saying that if someone wants to do it, fair enough. But I don't see myself doing it. What about you?
Yeah, I think Ben Krellin raised a great point on this, which was that we're going to have at least 2 double game weeks this season, right?
Correct.
And of course, if you think that there's going to be a bit more, which some uncertainties can come up as it has literally in the last 2 seasons, which would probably be against most people's initial expectations at the start of the season. But the most important point too is that when you get a full understanding of the back half of FPL, you will still have Holland versus Leicester at home in Game Week 30, which I think Sertalp discussed as well on the timeline. So he aptly pointed out that there's effectively right now a 0.2 EV loss for just waiting for that fixture. And I think that that's a very good point. If you're someone who just wants to use the chips early, you think that you're very pessimistic, let's say, for whatever reason. Like, let's say if you think the mystery chip has to be used on a double game week to be valuable and potentially is stronger than the triple captaincy sort of opportunity cost, I guess, then yeah, there's that. So maybe there's a week where you use mystery chip, maybe there's a week where you use a bench boost. So that's two weeks already where you're using chips, and that's obviously the pessimistic view, I guess, on triple as in, well, a bit of an optimistic view on triple captain for this week, I suppose. But yeah, I think that's the key point. Whether you think that you can't wait for a Southampton fixture, a Leicester fixture, and like you pointed out, the reality is this season, I think we think that Salah, Saka, and Haaland are in a tier of their own.
Yes.
And Salah and Saka will all play these 3 teams that I've just mentioned. And look, if you are someone who looks into team strengths, teams like Wolves are pretty close as well. We just saw a nuclear Saka haul as well versus a team like Wolves. Yep. So look, there are plenty of chances this season to wait and to get a better understanding of the game state. And some of them will also sort of coincide, before the Game Week 30 versus Leicester, but then after, maybe when the mystery chip gets revealed, and then you can make your decision then as well. So I feel like there's just plenty of windows left. We don't necessarily need to jump on this one. For Haaland, I kind of get the point, because it's the case that, he's someone who has been a little bit injury prone in the past. We know that City go deep into the Champions League. His minutes get managed a little bit, I suppose, around that. This is a good time to do so, because Haaland just mentioned that he's fully fit for the first time in however
a long time.
But yeah, because of the context that the other picks are very strong, I'm a little bit cold on triple captaincy. And I feel like maybe it can give a manager a great mental boost for the season if you feel like you haven't enjoyed the start. But beyond that, I'd have to say it's still probably a wait and see in my case.
Also, I mentioned about gambling on a particular set of outcomes, and another outcome which would be part of that set, where you triple captain Holland this week, is that you're gambling that the mystery chip is a chip which will be better off if used in a double game week, which might not necessarily be the case, because we actually have no idea what sort of chip it's going to be. Apparently, neither do the FPL Tower folks, so it's really up in the air right now. If we had even an inkling of what sort of chip that was going to be, then fair enough. But I just feel there's too much uncertainty, and the Sartal point just drives it home. You're not even losing that much EV if you want to believe in EV from Game Week 30, because I don't think review posts that far along. So that, I think, was Scout's EV, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, No, I think that is Scout TV, but it's a great point. I just think that we have no faith really in any of these defenses now. So why be super set on Ipswich being the one to target? I guess.
Fair point.
Yeah. Shall we jump into some chat questions then?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so Tahir says no Kwanzaa. Well, sorry. I mean, I guess I did eventually bring Kwanzaa into the discussion, but it was relevant for my team, so apologies if you had to sit through that. Salah says, evening both, abysmal week for me, getting 50 points. He wants to sort of decide between which two Nkunku, Gordon, Cho to start. I would probably just play Nkunku and Gordon if I'm being completely honest with you. I know Cho has a decent fixture, but generally speaking, when you look at the underlying data, Cho's very inferior of the other two picks. Gordon, at least, you can guarantee really good minutes as long as it's not a red card. And he's already sort of gotten his fitness back, I'd suppose, as close to best as possible. So there's that. Andrew Barton says, hoping Pedro Porro's okay. So a little bit of discussion on Pedro Porro. I feel like we've touched on that. You said that you're rolling, generally speaking, right? So
yes.
Yeah. I guess
unless again, a good point from someone in the chat is that if you were to be ruled out for multiple game weeks, then yeah, I'm pretty sure I will have to reconsider. But
yeah,
based on what we've seen, I'm not too keen on making a transfer. Also because Dunk was seen in training today, so that just means that I have one more defender now on my bench than I was considering, because I had just considered that Dunk will not play against United, but looks like he probably will, and that just means I can play him worst case scenario.
Did Fabian or Fabian actually mention that there was an issue with Dunk?
Not really, okay. But as we've seen, first of all, I don't know his managing style or how he speaks to the press. So he could easily be an Eddie Howe or a Steve Cooper, but we are hoping he's more of an Ange Postecoglou. So no news means good news, I hope.
Nah, yeah, I think I would also mention that just like João Pedro, Dunk actually came really late into the preseason, so he played, I think, 45 minutes of football. So I think that was my initial guess on Dunk. I think he should be fine. Luther says, when will FPL Chase return on the show? He's back from retirement. Technically, we only had him on the show after he retired, so maybe we'll have to wait for him to retire again, if he ever does. Let's see. I think...
Yeah, so Manon's point was about Lewis, by the way. So he's saying that even if he gets Lewis still, Rico Lewis till Game Week 3, he'll count it as a success.
Yes.
Which is what we said.
Yes.
Basically, that makes sense.
We did discuss triple captaincy quite a bit.
Yeah, we did.
People asking about Son. I think, look, we're a little bit low on Son in terms of, I guess, drafting Son into our teams, although I happen to own Son in another fantasy game.
Yes, same.
Ironically, but I think that you can be pessimistic on Son, but if we get a leak, for example, that Foden starts versus Ipswich, I generally would make that transfer. That's where I'm sitting at, because I think Foden is just that good, and I think he is a better pick than Son. That's just my opinion, but otherwise, I think you should be very happy with owning a pick like Son. Because
so you would do, sorry, just to clarify, you would do Son to Foden with the one free transfer for Game Week 2?
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I don't know, honestly, because I'm thinking even if he starts, is it going to be building up his minutes, or is he straight away going to get 90?
I don't think he's going to necessarily straight away get 90, but I also feel like if you think about Son, right? Technically, his next 3 fixtures aren't great because you've already skipped one good one. Then he actually plays Newcastle away, and then I think he plays Arsenal. Whereas Foden's going to play West Ham and Brentford. So if you're already kind of a little bit doubtful over the Son pick, you're going to save 0.5 in the process, and you're going to pick up Foden, who has, I think, a 3-week run of better games compared to Son. And the next time Son actually has a better fixture than Foden is like Game Week 5. So that's sort of where I'm at with that. But I'm very high on Foden. And maybe his minutes can drop because we know that there's a bit of a system change in City. But I feel like he's one of those players where as long as he's back to full fitness, we're going to see a lot of Foden. Because I feel like 45 minutes into something like 70-75 is very plausible. And I do think Foden starts. happy to be wrong once again. But as I said, I would only make that transfer if we got the leak that he starts, and I think I'd be happy jumping on to Foden and sort of saving the money versus Son. But I know it's close.
It is, because I was actually leaning the other way, but it is such a close decision that you just have to consider what value you have assigned to a free transfer and how much do you see Foden paying back the additional expected value, because there definitely is a lot of expected value to be had, assuming his minutes build up to close to 90 around game week 3-4.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've just quickly had a look at them, like just running around 90. Clearly, of course, we have that sort of general issue, which is Son's penalty share is
lower than maybe
lower than you might think, also potentially higher than you might think. But then, I mean, there's even in game week 4, there's a 2.4 EV swing there, and so I feel like whenever you look at, let's say, solvers, they'll always recommend, I suppose, a transfer ahead of time, right? As long as you're already getting some net EV on the week where you make that transfer, and so that's my thought. And I feel like just looking at a lot of the solver moves this season, the reality is we're going to be moving or making moves like that. So we're going to be moving from Saka to Salah. We're going to be moving from Son to Foden. We're going to be moving for the most part like that. I know I've literally just done Kwanzaa to Lewis, which is the exact opposite of what I said. Although it is Lewis, a very good City defender. So the EV gulf there is probably as big as a swing, like huge. Exactly what I mentioned.
It is extremely huge. Yeah, absolutely.
And so it is worth considering, what plans, like what transfers you had planned versus, what a Son transfer can give you as of right now.
So Cyber says it's going to be a fun season, the Holland versus Salah dynamic for sure. I'll be happy if Holland gets 2 or less returns versus Ipswich. It's, all of us with only Haaland are definitely banking on this game. If this game does not transpire the way we think it will, I think we are going to be in for a rough season. Of course, things can turn around, like a lot of managers showed us last season, but a slow start is never a good thing. So I think we'll just have to take it on the chin, because I'm definitely not reacting to it either way.
Yeah, I'm fine. I think so. The last question might be just Omer's question, which is, which 5.5 mid would you recommend to switch from Mavididi? I would actually back Ben Brereton Diaz. I don't know where you stand. I mean, you own Ben Brereton Diaz, so
so maybe I'm more skeptical than someone who is looking at him from the outside.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's natural, because I'm trying to shield myself or insulate myself against a benching or an early sub.
Right.
But in general, I do feel like he is one of the better picks. I just think that you have to forego any thoughts of him ever taking a penalty. You just have to depend on him getting good npxG like he did last in the game week, in the game against Newcastle, which is, I suppose, the only encouraging bit. I think he got like 0.36 xG against Newcastle. So even though it was against 10 men, so maybe don't read too much into it, given that Southampton are one of the worst teams in the Premier League. So, but again, Fran has already pointed out that if you own Mavididi, you had something in mind, which is to bench him for most of the game weeks. So why not ride out that plan? I don't see why you need to transfer him out unless you want to play that player this game week. And if that is the case, then I suppose BBD is the best choice.
Yeah, it's a good point. I would also probably mention Rodgers, because I think the assumption that we led in the beginning was that because Leicester actually have an away fixture this week, I don't think that you would have planned to play Mavididi anyways. He's not going to drop this week. If you roll, you could actually go to Rodgers, I suppose, and save yourself some money. But I think that the appeal of BBD is that generally the run of games for Southampton between games 2 and 5 is just brilliant. The only other pick that I can think of right now is Semenyo and Minte or Smith Rowe, like these sorts of picks. But Smith Rowe were I feel like as I sort of mentioned in my preseason content, I felt like he was definitely someone who needed to build match fitness, and I think that was sort of one of the traps of preseason, because there's playing 90 minutes in the preseason, then there's playing sort of more than 65 minutes in the Premier League, where the intensity is incredibly dialed up. And I feel like I probably overstepped in terms of thinking about Smith Rowe's general sort of fitness trajectory. So I feel like a lot of us are lower on him. With Minte, you have this whole concussion debacle, and I don't really understand what the situation, because I feel like Brighton are trying to get out of jail here, or concussion protocol jail, I suppose, by saying that he doesn't actually have a concussion and he said the wrong thing to the doctor, which just doesn't sit very well with me, to be honest.
I don't think it's going to fly because if they have used the concussion sub, then there is no way to get around that.
Yeah,
But
that's very
if he
odd.
starts, it is very odd.
And Semenyo is, I think the only thing is he looks great as a pick, and I think I've been really high on his xMins because of the, not because of the Solanke transfer, but really like the right wing depth that team is just lacking. But yeah, the reality is the runner games is not as sweet as Ben Brereton Diaz. So for Ben to probably have slightly better EV actually just on 69 minutes to Semenyo's 80, I think just says enough about how good BBD is as a pick. And I feel like, yeah, it's really between him and Rogers for me if you make a decision on Game Week 3. Although I guess if you make a decision on Game Week 3, you're missing on Ben for Game Week 2. So then Omer's situation is, okay, if I jump into Ben this week,
that's why
then
I was
it might
saying
be worth
that
it.
if you want to play that player this week, then might as well do it this week. And
that's fair.
So another point on Semenyo is Evanilson, right? Now Evanilson has been confirmed, and he's going to start potentially as a striker every single week.
Okay, because it's the center forward share thing. Yeah,
exactly. So that I think is now almost nil. And I also feel like the penalties are almost nil, because if 100%. I remember correctly, Evanilson took penalties for Porto, and he, from what I remember, once Galeno missed a penalty, he took penalties, if I'm not wrong. But I might be maybe misremembering something, because there was a period of uncertainty in FC Porto where we didn't really know who was going to take the next penalty.
He's taken 9 penalties, scored 7, missed 2.
Nice. So from remembering that, I knew that Galeno's, because I had to model Galeno's penalty share, so that's the only reason I know that. So with him most probably being on penalties, him or it's going to be between him and Kluivert, I feel like Semenyo's appeal is diminished quite a bit. But I still feel, just in general as a pick, he is still a pretty good player. So his EV has been tanked. So if you are someone who wants to chase EV, then I feel like BBD is clearly one of the top picks in that price point, at that price point.
Yeah, agree with you completely.
There are a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to give like quick answers and just end the pod there. Do we have?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to run through them?
Yeah, like Salah Ahmed is saying, thoughts on Mbuma as a pick. I just feel like fixtures are horrendous, so no, I don't think people should buy him. Even though he could potentially be on pens. If he's on pens, then again, it's going to be the same thing as last season. I'm going to keep complaining about his bad fixtures, and the EV is just going to be there because it's Mbuma and he takes set pieces, he takes penalties. I'm really confused. I mean, reviews probably going to suggest him at some point. So I don't know what you think, Fran.
Yeah, I can't imagine that you'd buy him for 3 and bench him for 4 and 5. It just doesn't sit well with me. But yeah, definitely a great transfer in Game Week 6. Yep. I think Connor's in the chat, so hello. Bringing in Watkins Game Week 3. I think he's a great pick for Game Week 3. And for those people who have 2 free transfers stocked up, like if you want to go immediately out of Haaland and you want to go into Watkins, potentially you want to go into Palmer instead, that sort of thing in the midfield, I actually think it makes a lot of sense. So if I mentioned a specific line, which was something like, if you're unhappy with Nkunku by Game Week 3, you could very well do something like Haaland to Watkins and Nkunku to Palmer then. That's affordable and could be something that's right up your alley. But I think a lot of people are still eyeing up Salah at the end of the day, which is more of a Game Week 4/5 transfer. As far as Mitoma, maybe you want to touch on him. I feel like the issue with Mitoma is that at 6.5, when we're looking at Brighton as a team, you're still going to get more value from the players who are at 5.0 and 5.5, and I'm not sure if Mitoma's generally that great. I don't know if you have any revised opinions on that, because I know we talked about Mitoma quite a bit last season.
Absolutely. And I immediately thought about the discussions we had where there was a point in time where we thought Mitoma was also being genuinely underrated on expected value. And then him getting inconsistent minutes for a large part, or basically not playing since December. I heard the commentator saying that this was his second start since December, which seems crazy to me, and I have not verified it because the commentators are wrong so many times that this could very well be one of those times. But assuming that this was his second start, it does seem that they will focus on making sure he's not injured, and they have so many players who can play that position now. So I just don't feel like Fran said, Minte is a much better choice. Again, assuming that they play similar minutes, they start, but they get subbed off around 70-75. And also, Joao Pedro, I feel like, is the clear pick. So if you wanted to go for just one Brighton attacker, I feel like Joao Pedro is the clear one pick. And if you wanted to go for a midfielder specifically, I feel like Minte is much better still.
Yeah, actually, can I ask you one question before we close the pod? So,
Yes.
Garnacho and Rashford and Amad Diallo. So, what do you think the situation is with these players? I think Rashford, as I previously said, is probably the one who's nailed. But yeah, like, where are you at with the starts with Amad and Garnacho?
I don't think we ever got around to talking about this, but I just got the results 2-3 weeks ago, and I won the United Predictors League last season.
Oh,
so this
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I won. Did you tweet about that?
I did. I got like an average score of 9.57 out of 11. So that was my average score. So this is not to say that whatever I say is right, because in the very first game week I got 9 out of 11, which is a subpar score. Because I had tweeted, or not tweeted, but I had messaged Fran that I thought Bruno would start as false 9. He ended up starting as a false 9 with Mount in midfield, but Diallo also started, where I was expecting Garnacho to start instead of him. So as of this game week, going off of last season, I still feel like Diallo is the first one who will be benched at any moment, because it still feels like he's in many ways the most inexperienced one, which he is. So I feel like Garnacho, Rashford, and Bruno false 9 could just be what they end up going with. And Zirkzee seems to be the perfect candidate for like around 60, 65, 70 minutes. You bring him in, bring Bruno back into midfield, and then you have an attacking trio of, let's say, Diallo, Rashford, and Zirkzee, or Garnacho, Rashford, and Zirkzee, or there are so many combinations you can make out of that. So for now, I feel like Garnacho should start Gameweek 2, and that is what I am going to predict. But that is the one spot of uncertainty between Garnacho and Diallo. So perhaps go for neither for now. But with Rashford, people who've gone for Rashford, I respect the decision. I respect the boldness of it, and the minutes are certainly there. So I would suggest that, based off Game Week 1 and Ten Hag's general demeanor around Rashford, he is the one player I would say, apart from Bruno, who I would consider as from United's attack.
Yeah, 100%. Great. I think that closes off the pod. So thank you guys so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the stream, please feel free to drop a like and also subscribe. That really does help support the channel. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. For any podcast listeners, do rate as 5 stars. And thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, guys. See you next week. Bye.